Here's a quick review of the Seiko Fieldmaster, erroneously nicknamed the Contra. Well, no one knows exactly. There's speculation that the Contra nickname came about because someone was trying to sell this watch, or these types of watches, under the military banner in the hopes of getting more money. The reality is there is no actual evidence that this was used by the Contras or any other military or paramilitary service anywhere, organization. The reality is, and it's not as exotic, that this is simply a hiking watch. Seiko in the 80s started releasing different types of watches for hiking under their Fieldmaster tag, and this happened to be one of them. Its main claim to fame is it's made out of little components. Now, each one is about 30 millimeters wide and about 60 millimeters in length. So wearing it is a little weird, as I will demonstrate. The original band that this came with had to be much shorter than a regular one because this is a relatively long watch. Most of the original bands are worn out, so you have to improvise, and in my case I made one, but I think other people tend to cut rubber straps shorter. And regardless, when you finally wear it, this is how it looks. It's not the easiest thing to wear because the way this angles at the pivot means the watch face is facing away from you. So you have to tilt your wrist like this to read it. Sorry, the battery is dead. This uses oddball batteries and I had to place an order for. But this is how you would wear it. And I've seen some people actually switch this around somehow to get this component here, because it's spring bars that hold it in the pivot, but the factory design was to have the clock on top. Now, I got mine as this weird, there were multiple, actually, Yahoo Auction Japan purchases many years ago, and for some reason, the person glued the bezel on top here, so this doesn't spin. All these watches you're seeing here are dead and need a new battery. Sorry about that. This is a newer, much better condition version that also doesn't have a battery. This even has the original tag. Interesting little factoid. These came in two modules. This is a module 2C21, which is what you usually see. And this module is listed as a 1421. I forget which one now is supposed to be Japan domestic market versus the world. This is thought to have been released in both. Now, incidentally, speaking of the bezel, this one spins freely. Okay, it's a little tight here, but there are no detents. Now, given how good of a condition this watch is in, it's entirely possible that this was the way the bezel was meant to be, and that's why the person ended up super gluing this one, or maybe not. If you have one, I'd be curious to hear, because it's a fairly rare watch, so not many people comment about owning it. What other thing? I suspect the quartz movement in this comes from a woman's watch. And just to give you an idea of how small these watches really are, here's a Seiko 4S21, which is about a 36-ish millimeter watch. And look at this. A tiny watch on an even tinier watch. So my understanding is these weren't very popular and they weren't made for very long. And again, no one knows much about it, but there's really, it's maybe cool for some people to call it a Contra watch or tie it to the military, but there is no evidence. Now, the other main claim to fame is, first of all, the compass. As you can see here, this screw holds the module in place. Once you unscrew it, you elegantly pop it out, and there you have it. I also have the map meter module, which I can't find because, well, that's just the way it is. But to make up for it, here's another of the Fieldmaster watches from the 80s. And this has the same concept of a map marker. So what that does, you see the marker right there? It's supposed to be centered at 0. So what you do is you unscrew this protective cap, and once you do that, you have this very sharp wheel. And you place it upon your map, and this is in a scale of kilometers. And then you start moving. Oh, beautiful, that doesn't work. Let's slice my finger up a little bit, like that. And you start moving the wheel along the map, and it measures, and it converts, in this case, to kilometers. So that is the point of that. Incidentally, you may have also noticed that this doesn't fully work. That's because Seiko Anodigi quartz movements from the 80s don't hold up the best. They've usually been flooded, abused, they've had battery leaks, and it's sort of a iffy thing if you can resuscitate it, which is why if you happen to collect things like that, it's always good to try to stock up on spares, because Seiko obviously doesn't support quartz movements from relatively cheap watches from the 80s. But the point is the same. The module acts the same way, except the module is only just a map marker without anything else. And there's also a digital module, and there's some controversy as to which markets had those. I believe Japan had those, but perhaps certain European markets or even North American markets didn't. That's not clear, but that's basically the gist of it. So it's a small little square watch, and it has removable modules. The compass by itself is clear, and it's attached by the screw here. And if I knew where I put the map meter, you could put that in there, or if I had the digital chrono module, you could put it in there, and that'd be that. Again, I think one of the biggest flaws, above all, is having the design with the watch on the top head. As I demonstrated when I put it on my wrist, it's a pain because you have to tilt your wrist. But that being said, it's still a very interesting thing. One thing I've noticed after years of buying watches on Yahoo Auctions Japan, a lot of, especially the sports watch, dive watches tend to be really abused there. They usually have little plastic compass attachments. So at least in Japan, for the most part, oftentimes these watches were used the way they were intended. And I guess in North America, and as a collector now, everything, so-called tool watches or older tool watches are sort of viewed as a novelty. But people really did use these watches, and that's why a lot of them didn't survive, and a lot of them were really beat up. But the Fieldmaster line, which is what fed into the Landmaster line, was very interesting, and there were a lot of innovations. Like in this oddball Fieldmaster, they have this. And if you'll notice, it says plastic. And you think, did they cheap out? Why didn't they use metal? Because this was meant for extreme conditions. And it was determined that if you had a plastic case back, it wouldn't freeze to your skin in very cold climates, whereas if it was metal, it would. That's why they used plastic. Very, very interesting, innovative designs. And again, the Fieldmaster series, which is this, and technically there was the so-called Seiko Arnie. There was another version called the Fieldmaster as well, which I believe was only sold in Japan, and it looked just like an Arnie. And all of these guys, again, fed into the Landmaster design, which is really from the 90s onward. And that's about it. And so if you ever see these, keep in mind, and if you're interested in buying one, keep in mind you need a shorter strap, and it's sort of a pain to wear, so it's a novelty. I mean, you can find some pictures online where people actually wear it, but it's hard to believe anyone would really wear it on a day-to-day basis because the curving is really a pain. But that's what it is, and it's another interesting piece of Seiko history. I also believe this was designed by Seiko's famous engineer Tokunaga. So that's about it, and as usual, thanks for watching.